interesting. Now, you mentioned Johnny Depp. I mean, you know, being the big time Rocketeer fan I am, I've searched all kinds of research into the film, and one of the interesting things I found was the fact that Disney was choosing sort of between you and Johnny Depp, and that Joe Johnson ended up choosing you. Now, did you ever really get to know Depp? Did you ever think like, oh, you know, he's
No, I
probably
met
going to
him
get the role?
once. I met him once, and it's not really true that it was between me and Johnny, and then they picked me. It's more like they offered the movie to Johnny, and he turned it down, and then it came to me.
Oh.
So, but I got the chance to thank him
Mhm.
because he was in. At the time, he was my agent, and his agent were right next door to each other in the agency.
Mm.
And I went up to the office, and he happened to be in there. So I went in and gave him a big old bear hug and thanked him for turning the movie down.
Hey, thank you. You just got me a lot of money for that lead role. Thank you. Yeah.
Believe me, it wasn't a lot of money,
Oh, right.
but it was my first film, and it was terribly exciting to think of doing.
Mm.
And so I might have startled him. I picked him up and gave him a great hug. He's not a large person.
Well, speaking of large, I mean, you're what, 6'5" now, if I'm right?
6'4".
6'4". I mean, you know, I've never gotten the understanding of why people don't like being tall, because everyone I talk to who say they're tall, they always say, oh, it's the worst thing. As an actor, isn't that nice being 6'4" and being sort of this tall figurehead? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I never really thought about it, but I don't mind being tall. Sometimes I bump my head when I'm on board the ship.
Well,
You know, sometimes it could be hard to find shoes that fit and stuff like that. But, you know, of all the sort of misfortunes that you could have physically, that I don't even think that counts as one.
so, you know, being the stalker I am of your Twitter profile, because you know, the funniest thing is that when I found out you were on Twitter, I hadn't known until like a few days ago, and I'm like one of your biggest fans, so I felt like ashamed about that. But when I found out that you went to Vancouver Fan Expo and you were with, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were with Electric Playground.
Yeah.
The funniest thing was that I don't know if you know PAX East, but in Boston, any
No.
idea? No. Well,
No.
it's sort of similar, and I
Yeah.
ended up meeting the same guys there, and and you know, because then I was thinking, oh, maybe they have to mention to hook me up with you, but you know that I found that kind of interesting just because I was thinking like, oh wow, Destiny calls for that. But you know, anyways. So my point being is that video game wise, what do you think about it now compared to movies? You know, Roger Ebert, you might have known this, once said video games aren't really art, and a lot of people disagree with that. But what do you think about that? Have video games really become like movies in terms of art, in terms of telling a story, or do you think movies are still way ahead?
I, I mean, I'm sure if you were to ask Roger again about that statement, he might feel differently.
Hmm.
There's no question that video games are art, but there's also no question that they're a business. And like any business, they, you know, the more business it is, the sort of there's an inverse proportion to the degree of the art of something. What am I trying to say? It's a commercial. It's commercial, and the
Right.
more commercial something is the less liable it is to be a genuine work of art, and that holds true for cinema as well. I don't think Roger Ebert would disagree that a great deal of what gets made in cinematically is not art at all. It's garbage, and it's the same in the video game world. But video games very definitely are an art. There's no question about it. Some of them are just more artistic than others.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, man. I mean, it's been a very interesting debate, so I was curious about your opinion. Now, besides playing Darren Richmond in AMC's The Killing, do you have a particular favorite TV show besides the one you're in right now? I know that may be hard to pick against, but that's why I'm asking.
Well, right now I'm watching Game of Thrones, which I shouldn't admit because it's our competition. So Game of Thrones, probably the best 13 hours of television I ever saw.
Wow.
Was the first, no, not Game of Thrones, but was the first season of Rome.
I see.
But in terms of TV series, I don't really watch. I don't really watch a lot of TV. What did I just watch? Recently, a friend of mine turned me on to Firefly. So I watched all of Firefly, and I loved it. And I'm enjoying Game of Thrones, but nothing really for me holds a candle to the first season of Rome.
Oh, that's interesting.
That was amazing. If you haven't seen it, you should see it.
I'll check it out. Any recommendation you would make, Billy Campbell, I would definitely go check out. But anyway, without sounding like a fanboy, anyway. But so this is a very interesting question. I want you to have your opinion on. Obviously, Rocketeer going back to 1991, you probably know that it just wasn't as big or popular as it is now. Obviously, the Avengers came out. You got to see an early screening of the Avengers, am I right?
I did, yes.
You lucky dude. I mean, like, I have been looking forward to seeing it, but my point being is, how did from Rocketeer, like from 1991, come to now where it's become a huge phenomenon, it seems? You know, like, you see superhero movies all the time now. You didn't used to see that. They were mainly, it seemed like, experimenting with it back then. But what do you think about that? Do you think it was just the addition of making the special effects better? Was it just they had a better understanding of the story? Why do you think it has evolved so much to make it more popular than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, really?
In like superhero movies?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's basically, it's just comic books on screen, you know? So they figured out a way to put comic books on screen, and the technology had to sort of catch up with the intent. But it has finally. I mean, they can do stuff now that looks completely real.
Yeah.
And so I think they've become huge because it's the joy of seeing comic books come to life. I mean, the joy of comic books to begin with were I think they were more than just sort of post-adolescent male, powered fantasies. They were also, I don't know, they did sort of a lot of different things, but it's kind of the joy of it's the same as the joy of science fiction, you know, speculative fiction, except it's more, I don't know, kind of interior. It is more about our kind of inner desires, I think, superhero stuff. A lot of it I mean, frankly, it doesn't do much for me. I'm not really into superhero movies. I was never really into superhero comics. But I can see how they would have gotten to be big stuff.
Yeah, yes?
So I was just going to say that superhero movies are not my favorite genre.
Oh, yeah, I think it was an interesting take, though, because obviously you know what it's like to have been a part of a superhero movie back in 1991 compared to now. Obviously, it's a huge difference. But, yeah, it's a very interesting topic for sure. So, now also, this is,
Technically speaking, The Rocketeer is not a superhero movie. He's not a superhero.
He's not a superhero.
He doesn't have superpowers. He's just a guy with a machine, you know,
right.
With a rocket. So.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you're right. You're right. I think, you know, the term superhero a lot of times is exaggerated. Like you said, like people all the time are calling these, even if it's not technically superpowers, like Batman, you know, he doesn't technically have superpowers, but people always call it a superhero film. So it's kind of a mainstream thing. But you're right. You're totally right. It's just a guy with a jetpack who doesn't even want to deal with the problems. But you know, it's quite an interesting topic. So.